This is my military ID, sir. Name and rank right there.
All right, hold it steady for me. You stationed nearby?
Yes, Fort Easton.
Okay.
On leave this week.
Got it. Just verifying. Appreciate your cooperation.
240 M. April 16. Leoncenlingisha Joe. Spring sunshine streamed down the main gate of Joint Base Lewis McChord, Washington, casting the familiar, cool light of an active military base onto the metal fence and security signs. Staff Sergeant Kevin Ashford drove his silver Nissan Pathfinder into the civilian parking lot right next to the base entrance. He had just finished 6 hours of terrain orientation training with the young soldiers. His boots still clung to the mud from the training ground. The smell of sweat and gunmetal still lingering. The combat uniform Ashford was wearing wasn't ceremonial attire, nor was it special uniform. It was the standard U.S. Army service uniform, complete with name tag, Staff Sergeant rank, and the insignia of the 2nd Infantry Division, a uniform he had worn for over 11 years. Since enlisting in 2008, through deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, through promotions, and quiet but significant rank changes. For Ashford, this uniform was more than just fabric and insignia. It was honor, discipline, proof that he had done everything his country required. He switched off the engine, opened the car door, and reached to the back seat for his patrol cap when a white Ford Explorer, bearing government license plates, slowed down and stopped about 15 feet away. The car door swung open. A man stepped out with a decisive gait, tactical body armor over a polo shirt, his ice badge dangling from his chest. Agent Marcus Dalton advanced toward Ashford with the gaze of someone accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed. Dalton didn't know that in the next 47 minutes, a single decision would destroy his entire 4-year career. Marcus Dalton strode purposefully across the warm concrete under the afternoon sun. He was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, his eyes sharp and cold, accustomed to observing and assessing others in fleeting seconds. His ice badge hung prominently on his chest, a silent affirmation of his authority. For the past 8 months, Dalton had regularly driven around military bases, calling it familiarizing himself with the area, a practice never officially approved by his superiors, but never reprimanded for. That silence convinced him he was doing the right thing. "Good afternoon," Dalton said, a few steps from Ashford, his hand near the gun at his side. "Show me your identification." His voice was calm, yet commanding. Ashford paused for a moment. This request wasn't entirely unfamiliar. Military personnel often presented identification at base gates, checkpoints, or during random security checks. He saw no reason to react. Ashford pulled his CAC card from his breast pocket, an identification card issued by the Department of Defense, and thrust it straight at Dalton. The card clearly displayed a portrait, rank, identification number, and security access privileges of an active-duty military personnel. Dalton glanced at it quickly. So quickly, it was as if he had already decided that what he was seeing wouldn't be enough. He lowered his hand and shook his head. "That's military ID," Dalton said. "I need proof of citizenship." The atmosphere between the two men changed instantly. Ashford frowned, the initial cooperation turning into caution. "I just presented federal documents. I am an active-duty military personnel." "What is this?" Dalton took half a step forward, closing the distance. "Immigration enforcement," he replied. "We've received information about individuals using fake military uniforms. I need a passport, birth certificate, or naturalization certificate." At that moment, Ashford realized this wasn't a routine test. This was a prearranged scenario, and he, in his U.S. military uniform, had just been placed at the center of it. Ashford felt a surge of heat run through his chest. Not panic, but the sharp alertness of someone accustomed to identifying risk. He glanced quickly around the parking lot. Dalton stood slightly to the left, unconsciously taking control. At the same time, a second ICE vehicle slowly rolled up, stopping behind the Ford Explorer, forming a discreet but deliberate pincer movement. This was no longer a question. This was a confrontation being set up. "I was born in Oakland, California," Ashford said, his voice even and clear. "I didn't bring my birth certificate with me to training. You have my military ID." Dalton smirked, not taking it seriously. "Not enough for me," he replied, his hand already on the handcuffs. "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." Ashford paused for a moment. "Why are you detaining me?" "Failure to provide required documentation," Dalton answered coldly. "Suspected immigration violation." The words echoed like memorized formulas, used to legitimize a decision already made. Around them, the crowd in the base began to take notice. A few soldiers passing by slowed their pace, their eyes glancing over Ashford's uniform before settling on the handcuffs on Dalton's wrists. Others turned away, not out of indifference, but because they understood that intervening now would only cause things to spiral out of control. Nearby, a guard car was parked with its engine running, the driver silently raising his phone to record. In Ashford's mind, the choices were clear and ruthless. Resistance meant the risk of violence. Arguing on the spot wouldn't change Dalton's assumption. He could appeal to his superiors, but time wasn't on his side. Ultimately, Ashford made the decision of a soldier trained to control the situation, not to win an argument. He slowly turned his back, placing his hands behind his back. At Detention, Shipathru P.M. Just 7 minutes after parking, the sound of metal snapping shut echoed at his wrist. Ashford was still in his U.S. Army uniform, still standing on American soil. And in that moment, Marcus Dalton had crossed a line from which he would never return. Dalton grabbed Ashford's arm, leading him toward the white Ford Explorer. No further explanation. No warning of his rights. The rear door opened. Ashford was pushed into the back seat, his hands still cuffed, his seatbelt unfastened. The car rolled slowly, only about 200 meters, turning into a commercial parking lot near the base's perimeter, where ICE had set up a makeshift processing point known only to them. The smell of diesel and stale coffee mingled in the air as the car came to a stop. The clock showed 3:11 p.m. Ashford was led out and sat on a metal folding chair in the makeshift area. In front of him was a folding table, behind which was a tinted glass partition. Dalton stood opposite him. 2 other agents appearing: Torres, younger, and Chen, his eyes cold, his camera already in hand. "Empty everything from your bags," Dalton said, his voice even but firm. Ashford leaned forward, using his shoulders and elbows to empty his belongings because his hands were still shackled. A wallet, car keys, tactical pen, and phone fell onto the table. Dalton began photographing each item as if documenting a crime scene. He paused longer when he opened the wallet. Inside were a California driver's license, bank cards, Ashford's wife's military dependency card, and a small photograph, 2 little girls standing in front of a Christmas tree. Smiling brightly, Dalton picked up the driver's license, turning it over and over. "This could be fake," he said, Ashford looked straight ahead, his voice low and firm. "It's a California DMV document. You can check it." Chen walked around Ashford, taking pictures from various angles, his face, the insignia on his chest, his handcuffed hands. Every movement was theatrical, as if each click of the camera would turn a hypothesis into reality. Ashford recognized it immediately. He had witnessed how people fabricated falsehoods in far more distant places, and he understood that. Here, in his American uniform, he was becoming a case study needing to be proven for a decision he had already made. Dalton folded his wallet, placed it on the table, and looked up at Ashford as if considering his next move. "Where did you get this uniform?" the question rang out. Dry. Ashford didn't flinch. "I got it," he replied, each word clear. 11 years of service. Enlisted after high school. Completed numerous training and deployments. I'm Staff Sergeant. Dalton smirked. "A very convenient story." "No," Ashford said, his voice even. "It's true. Call First Sergeant Martinez. He'll confirm it immediately." Dalton ignored the offer. He reached for Ashford's phone, turning the screen toward him. The unlock code. Ashford shook his head. "I won't give it. It contains sensitive information. You don't have the authority to access it. That's a personal phone." Dalton growled. "No," Ashford replied, calmly but firmly. "It contains mission-related data, training schedules, and personnel lists. You don't have authorization, and I don't have the right to share it." The small room fell silent. Chen lowered his camera. Torres paused on the keyboard, looking at Dalton. For the first time, Dalton's confidence showed a crack. He was used to compliance, to anger or fear. But what confronted him now was procedural resistance. Precise and protected by regulations he wasn't sure of. Outside, the screeching of cars, the slamming of doors, voices rising in volume. The sounds echoed against the tinted glass like building pressure. Ashford couldn't see it, but he heard the change in rhythm. Something was approaching. And it wasn't on Dalton's side. He sat up straight, took a deep breath, and maintained a calm gaze. If this was a test, he knew he had passed the hardest part, not letting them decide who he was. 3-4-3-10 M. The processing room door burst open so forcefully the hinges creaked. A blast of hot air and hurried footsteps filled the small room. Leading the way was an Army lieutenant colonel in his formal uniform, his name tag Brennan prominently displayed on his chest, followed by 2 military policemen in MP insignia and a man in civilian clothes carrying a worn-edge leather briefcase. The room seemed to freeze. "Who is Dalton?" Brennan's voice rang out, deep and sharp, not loud but enough to cut short the thoughts of everyone present. Dalton straightened reflexively, like an officer called upon during a surprise inspection. "I am," he replied. Brennan didn't hesitate. "You will explain to me, right now, why you detained one of my active duty servicemen, without authority, without legal basis, and without understanding the boundary between federal law and military authority." Brennan turned to Ashford. "Staff Sergeant, are you injured?" "No." "Sir," Ashford replied. "Just handcuffs." Brennan nodded once. "Remove the handcuffs." Immediately, Torres looked at Dalton, waiting for a signal. Dalton was silent. A second passed. Heavy. Then Torres stepped forward, unlocking the handcuffs. Metal fell, leaving a red mark on Ashford's wrist. The man with the briefcase stepped forward, pulled out a business card, and handed it to Ashford. Bernard Hastings, he said softly but clearly, civil rights lawyer. From now on, do not answer any more questions. Hastings turned to Brennan. Nodding briefly, they understood each other. Let's go. Hastings said. Ashford stood up, rubbing his wrist, his gaze lingering for a moment on Dalton's face. Not anger, not defiance, just a remembrance. Dalton looked back, still holding that vague certainty that he had done the right thing. That certainty wouldn't last. Over the next few weeks, it will be worn down by records, evidence, and a legal system that this time he cannot control. 48 days after that afternoon, on the morning of June 3, Launchen Lingi Shizhou, a 73-page file was submitted to the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington. The case was titled Ashford v. 4 Dalton. There was no fanfare, no press conference, but each page carried the weight of 47 minutes of unlawful handcuffing. Ashford's legal team, led by Bernard Hastings and co-advisor former Department of Justice Attorney Linda Reeves, alleged racial discrimination, unlawful detention, violation of the Fourth Amendment, and intentional psychological harm. The file included 26 pieces of evidence, photographs of Ashford's wrists showing handcuff marks, testimonies from soldiers who witnessed the scene right outside the base gates, video data from the duty officer's phone, an unblemished military service record spanning 11 years, and, most notably, body cam footage from a military policeman who arrived at the scene after the situation had spiraled out of control. Every detail had a clear timeline, location, and sequence of actions. ICE responded in its usual pattern. Their lawyers invoked a disclaimer, claiming Dalton had reasonable suspicion, and described the incident as a minor inconvenience blown out of proportion by claims-seeking lawyers. In another case, with another person, that strategy might have worked, but not this time. During the evidence-gathering phase, cracks began to appear. Internal emails showed Dalton had received at least 3 racially motivated complaints during previous stops, none of which resulted in disciplinary action. A performance review noted high level of proactive enforcement, with the vague note needs further training in cultural sensitivity. And then, a private text message recovered from Dalton's phone. Sent 2 weeks before the incident, working around Lewis McCord today. This area is always suspicious. From that moment, the story ceased to be about a personal decision. It began to become evidence for a pattern that the system had ignored for far too long. The trial began on February 11, Launchen at the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington. The courtroom was packed, not out of fleeting curiosity, but because of the feeling this would be a case far beyond a typical detention. Judge Raymond Chen, a federal judge known for his impatience with abuse of power by state agencies, presided over the trial. From the jury selection stage, he asked blunt questions about bias, power, and responsibility, as if to strip away every layer of pretense before the trial actually began. In his opening statement, Bernard Hastings did not resort to emotional rhetoric or grandiose words about justice. He reconstructed a detailed, almost cold, timeline. Every hour, every movement, every decision was placed in its proper position. He produced the CAC card that Dalton had rejected, Ashford's service record with deployments to Mosul and Kandahar, the medals and security clearances granted only after investigations more rigorous than any immigration check. Then the video played. 12 minutes extracted from 47 fateful minutes. The courtroom fell silent as the images appeared, Ashford presenting his papers, Dalton refusing, Ashford asking for legal grounds. Dalton not answering. The sound of handcuffs closing while other soldiers watched. Hesitating between intervening and complying. No one in the courtroom needed comment. The sequence of images spoke for itself. When Ashford stepped up to the witness stand on the third day, he showed no indignation, nor sought pity. He answered like a soldier reporting precise, without a hint of emotion. And when asked what that experience had changed, Ashford said slowly, "I started to hesitate every time I put on my uniform outside the base. I wasn't sure anymore whether the person I was talking to was seeing a soldier or a suspect." That statement hung in the air in the courtroom, heavier than any legal argument. When Marcus Dalton's turn to stand as witness, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed dramatically. The man who had once confidently commanded at the base gate now sat upright, his hands resting on the wooden table, his gaze avoiding the rows of jurors. Bernard Hastings was in no hurry. He let Dalton present his case, allowing his initial answers to flow with familiar certainty. Dalton repeated what ICE had written in the file: reasonable suspicion, routine checks, risk of forged documents. Then, Hastings began to narrow the space. "Why do you think a federal military identification card is insufficient proof of legal status?" Dalton replied that the documents could be forged. Hastings nodded. Moving on to the next question. "Have you ever detained a white soldier in full uniform simply for not carrying a birth certificate?" Dalton hesitated. "I don't recall any specific cases." Hastings took another step forward. "Do you have any suspect descriptions that match Staff Sergeant Ashford on that day?" Dalton admitted no. Each answer eroded Dalton's defenses further. What remained was not reasonable doubt, but unproven assumption. The jury watched intently, some taking notes continuously, others quietly wiping away tears. When Hastings finished, without raising his voice, without emphasizing, the gap between Dalton's defense and reality was starkly apparent. After the final argument, the jury retreated to the deliberation chamber. 6 hours passed. By the afternoon of February 18, they returned. The jury president stood up and read the verdict. His voice even but firm: $15 million in damages, $2 million for actual damages, $13 million for punitive damages. The courtroom fell silent. Dalton sat motionless, his face blank, as if for the first time he realized the consequences of the 47 minutes he had once considered the process. Judge Raymond Chen's gavel slammed down on the table at 4:22 p.m. ICE's emergency request to reduce the compensation was rejected outright in court. The ruling not only upheld the $15 million amount but also sent a clear message this wasn't a technical error, but a deliberate violation of the Constitution. Within 72 hours of the verdict, Marcus Dalton was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. All enforcement powers he had previously held were immediately revoked. On March 5, the investigation concluded. Dalton was terminated from his contract for conduct unbecoming of a federal agent and a grave violation of procedural rules regarding detention authority. The personnel file, once filled with commendations for the number of arrests, now bears only a single, cold, and indelible note. The incident cost federal taxpayers $15 million and exposed failures in supervision and training. But Dalton wasn't the only one to pay the price. Media pressure and subsequent investigations forced Regional Director Frank Osborne, Dalton's direct superior, to resign. The performance reviews he had signed, praising aggressive initiative, now became evidence of dangerous complicity. 2 agents present at the detention, Torres and Chin, received suspensions and were required to participate in a retraining program. While not fired, their careers stalled permanently, tied to a case that law enforcement would later use as a prime example of power overstepping boundaries. The consequences of the ruling didn't stop at the individuals directly involved. In the weeks that followed, ICE faced unprecedented scrutiny from Congress and the Department of Homeland Security. Hearings were scheduled, focusing on a seemingly simple question that exposed a deep-seated flaw. How could an active-duty military personnel in full uniform be detained on suspected immigration right next to an active military base? Senator Tammy Duckworth, a combat veteran herself, called the incident an insult to those who serve the country. A comprehensive audit of ICE's operations around military facilities was conducted. The results forced the agency to change its policy. Agents were not permitted to approach or question individuals in uniform without direct authorization from a commanding officer and clear, specific legal grounds. Mandatory training courses on racial bias, constitutional limitations, and detention authority were implemented nationwide. The Ashford v. Dalton case quickly became teaching material in federal law enforcement academies. As an example of what happens when proactiveness is not accompanied by responsibility. For Kevin Ashford, the legal victory did not bring complete relief. After taxes and expenses, the remaining money was enough to pay off his mortgage, fund college for his 2 children, and make significant contributions to veteran support organizations. But the marks on his wrists that day were not just physical marks. They left a silent doubt. In 2021, Ashford completed his contract and decided not to re-enlist. He told friends that he still believed in the values he had sworn, but no longer believed that every institution would always protect those values. He transitioned to working in security training and conflict de-escalation, using his own experience to prevent similar mistakes from happening again. Marcus Dalton disappeared from public life after his dismissal. No interviews, no defense, no attempt to salvage his image. His last public records show him working as a private security guard for a small logistics company in rural Montana. A quiet but radical fall from federal power to a position of voicelessness. Not due to a conspiracy, not due to circumstances, but because of 47 minutes believing that his badge allowed him to override the Constitution. The Ashford Duels. Dalton case has since been taught in law classes and law enforcement training as a classic lesson on the boundaries of power. Not to condemn an individual, but to remind the system that unchecked power always seeks out the most vulnerable. And sometimes, that vulnerable person is someone in uniform, serving the same nation. In September 2009, Kevin Ashford stood in his military uniform for the last time, 11 years since his enlistment. He had no regrets about serving, but he understood more than ever that true loyalty isn't about remaining silent in the face of wrongdoing, but about defending sworn-upon values, even when the institutions themselves have forgotten them. That difference isn't abstract. It has a price. And in this case, that price was $15 million. A career ended. And an unerasable precedent. If this story makes you think about power, responsibility, and the assumptions we carry every day, please like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment. What does accountability look like to you? Because the most important conversations don't end when the gavel strikes. They begin there.